Hey guys, I'm sure you've heard about the controversial study published in Italy that labeled volleyball as the most contagious sport for COVID-19. I reached out to one of my Italian volleyball friends to learn more about this study and talk about it in this video. We also go on a little volleyball tangent at the end, which is always fun. I would love to hear your thoughts about this study in the comments section. Now let's get to it. What's up, guys? This is Coach Donny with ElevateYourself.org. We have a special guest today, Federico Francioni. Is that correct?
It's Francioni, but it's fine.
Francioni. And he's Italian. And just a short introduction for Federico. We met about 5 or 6 years ago, and he started coming out to the Thursday Night Open gym. And I noticed he had a different playing style. He was fundamentally more sound. And one thing I noticed in the Bay Area, a lot of the European players that move to the Bay Area for tech jobs, they have a very distinct style, is that they just are fundamentally sound. They're very good with their platform. They can perform all the basic skills, whereas I feel like the typical American player wants to do hitting lines. That's all they want to do. Passing is not going to be there. The middles might not be able to pass, but I think in Europe they value the fundamentals a lot more, and it shows in basketball and other sports. So we met each other, and for me, I'm a volleyball addict, so I keep up with international volleyball, and I don't have anybody else to talk to about that. Very few people. So knowing that Federico is Italian, and I know that Italians are crazy about football and volleyball, we immediately hit it off, and we started talking about the Italian national team, and just had so many great conversations and became good friends after that. So I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more, Federico.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's it's great. Oh, you had it completely right. And honestly, the Thursday night was awesome because I moved to Silicon Valley almost 7 years ago right now, and the first thing I was trying to do is okay, volleyball is going to be the best way to make new friends. And yes, it was right and fantastic from the very beginning. I was impressed by how much things you know about like volleyball in general from like day one. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, this guy knows a lot of Italian players that almost I don't even know. So the knowledge of Coach Donny is insane. And yeah, moving forward, I remember like when we started playing, how I was like, wow, here in the US, it's all about power play. You said it right. The level of the elevation and the power is insane comparing to the average Italian players. And on the drawback, there is a little bit more of like, yeah, difficulties with like maybe jump floating or something that is more technical.
Yeah.
And that's why I think like moving here was another dimension, even in learning new volleyball almost. So it was
Mm,
great. And
cool.
no, then I found out that became like a huge fan of your channel, and I didn't know at the very beginning you're creating this. And I will actually say to my Italian people, take a look at what this guy is doing because he has some really good advice, especially if you're interested in jump high, like I need.
Cool. Cool. Well, thanks for sharing about yourself. And Federico reached out to me last week, and he sent me this article, and it was originally in Italian, posted on Ivan Zaitsev's, who's a great national team player for Italy, on his Twitter account. And I'll read the translated title. And then eventually, Federico sent me the English one so I could read it. Volleyball proclaimed most dangerous sport regarding risk of contagion with COVID-19. And this is becoming a new hot topic on social media. And I'll give a general synopsis, and then Federico can go into a little bit more detail because he's been doing some research on it. And I think a lot of the materials is in Italian anyway. So I'll just do a basic rundown. So the Polytechnic University of Turin did a research on all the I guess the most popular sports and which one's the highest risk of spreading COVID-19. Because as you know, unfortunately, Italy was hit really, really hard with this illness, and one of the top death toll counts and cases. So it's very pertinent to them, and especially since sports are so big in Italy, especially volleyball, football. It's going to be a great concern as we all transition back into regular activity. So, if you can expand upon kind of what this study was about, if you know how it's done, and what we can take away from it.
Sure. It was, let's say, controversial at the very least. And everyone knows Ivan Zaitsev, and he is very emotional about volleyball. He really loves volleyball. And he actually tweeted about this study when it was published. And many people were literally going, what the hell? Why are we the most contagious sport? Because not so many data were disclosed at the time. The bottom line is the Polytechnic of Turin is one of the most prestigious like college in Italy. And the Italian Olympic Committee was asking to create like a report that was explaining how can we restart. So it's all about the phase two. After the contagion, now that we're plateauing, and what can we restart and how. So very, very good reason to do that. It's kind of funny. It's a little bit about the methodology that this study has used. And there are literally 2 points that I was literally, that sounds a little bit weird. The first one that I would like to get your thoughts on is they do not consider, or at least it doesn't show even in the complete report that I just had yesterday and I was about to read a little bit more in detail. It doesn't really show the amount and the length of the contact. It's not deemed as so important. So pretty much there is no way to measure how long the contact between two people lasts for. So you can probably grappling like wrestling, or you can touch yourself like basketball and soccer, or you can just go next one to each other like volleyball blocking, and there is no difference. Or at least in the report, there is no way to differentiate that. And that's the first thing I would like to ask you. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm glad you provided detail because, for me, I study so much biomechanics for sports performance and jump training. And after I read the result of a study, I always look at the sample size, how they conducted it, was there a double blind control. So that makes sense. I think it sounds like non-athletes might have conducted the study because the contact, and I'm sure with COVID, you probably just have to touch it for less than a second. But I do believe that frequency is important, or I guess the length of contact is important because we can mainly contract it, I think, through our eyes, nasal passage, and then through air. Touching a high five from far away is not going to be as contagious as breathing right here, right? And so that's my thought on it, is that I think they should have differentiated, shouldn't have equated all contacts as the same.
If you go into the methodology, what they did is they kind of create 4 scenarios. For example, like what about the gym or the environment where you play? What about like the event when you have like a competition? So there are 4 of those scenarios. And each scenario asks for the same amount of question related to different levels of risk. That goes from 0 to 4, where 4 is super elevated. But the only let's say sub-dimension for each scenario, it's all about the field. So they only and they only consider the dimension of the field and whether or not the field is inside or outside, so indoor or outdoor. Sorry. That means that, of course, volleyball field is smaller than soccer and is indoor. So that will lead for volleyball being extremely dangerous or contagious compared to soccer. That sounds kind of crazy to me. Yeah. Because on that idea, if you just measure that dimension, yes, that is true. The amount of people that plays in a 9 by 9 meters square, of course, is way more dangerous than running in a soccer field.
Yeah, that's my other thought, is that maybe they weighted the idea of a smaller court with more people involved. So it sounds like they ran more of a simulation, and they're the ones that dictated what parameters are the most important. If I were to do the study, I mean, obviously these guys have much higher degrees and done significantly more studies, but from my amateur point of view, it would make more sense to actually, I'm trying to think of how they even created the parameters. It sounds
they have and I can read into that, like it would be nice if you want to even show a couple of like a snapshot of that, but
yeah
the overall idea is that the dimension they're covering is the contact between athletes, the contact with the coaches, the contact with the people that are coming with the team, the number of people in one rally, let's call it, in one action, how many supporting staff is around, the locker rooms and the restroom, the fact whether you are in a pool, you are indoor, you're outdoor, and if there's any protective system or digitalization, sorry, that you're using. So these are the main sub-dimension for every scenario that I mentioned before.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that list makes sense, but I think it's not as black and white as the data, because as we know, there's a lot of research that can dictate. I read one research published. I was learned by another YouTuber named PGF Performance. Really, is an NBA performance trainer, where they did a study of two fathers. One, if they hear their kid crying and he doesn't respond, there's an elevated testosterone response. Second father, if he did respond, it decreases testosterone. So does that mean from that study that we should never respond to our kid to increase our testosterone so we can be better athletes, right? So I think the result of a study, how you apply it and how you interpret it, is really going to be the most important. But after you listed those parameters and how they define them, it makes sense. I think maybe that's probably the only way to objectify it. I think one additional sub-parameter they could have added is the length of contact, like as you pointed out earlier, because that makes a big difference. Because I'm trying to think of sports where, I mean, basketball, for example, even though there's a larger play surface, so high fives in themselves compared to rubbing sweat and being on top of each other for prolonged periods of time, and a lot of people in the center, I think they have larger, I think just as large rosters. And then, so
it's also interesting if you compare, for example, in the result, boxing with judo and with fencing, they look very similar. But in fencing, you're literally using a foil. I remember I used to be like a fencer before I started volleyball, but you're using a foil. You're completely covered. You even have a mask to some extent. I know it's not a medical mask in any way, but you can deem it as dangerous as playing wrestling or judo or boxing, where there is insane and intense physical contact, close contact. Because still, the closest contact you can have in fencing is literally going down and touch your opponent. That still means you're probably, 1 foot away, or half a foot at least. So it's kind of weird. There is another dimension that was kind of interesting to me, and I know you love like the methodology now, and I'm going to ask you the other question about the second thing that was like, oh, that's surprising. The way this study has been conducted is that the framework has been created. So these were the elements that were evaluated, and then it was sent out to all the major organizations of sports in Italy. So not only the pro and main one, but the top hundreds. So pretty much every organization that accounts for thousands of people will have a voice in saying what they deem the contagious level was. That is interesting to me. But as a sort of like an analyst, when I look at the data, that introduces a lot of bias. Because if you don't educate the person that is going to conduct or fill in the blanks on how the 4 level works, you are involving hundreds of people doing different surveys to some extent, and you introduce bias. You need to somehow validate that bias, right? Even if more people are responding to volleyball, it's not just one. How would you know that like people in boxing think that is less dangerous than volleyball or soccer? There should be some guidelines about that. It can't just be a 4 level. In fact, the part that, especially in Italy, is creating a lot of chaos is, well, soccer has let's say an average of 3, and volleyball is 4. How's that even possible? Even if you look down at the single entity, so if you go into the field, people that conducted that research, and I do have all the pages, so I looked into that yesterday, they put soccer as a 3 or a 2 in terms of risk. comparing to the people that fill out basketball and volleyball, they put a 4.
So you're saying on how they rated what's the most contagious, 4 is the highest, and
Yes.
then okay,
Yes.
yeah.
And that's the natural bias that gets introduced, but when you ask people to fill it out, anything.
Mm-hmm. So they were okay. So they were also, I guess, asking athletes to complete what how they perceive as the most
They were no,
contagious.
not athletes, and that might be. So there's been 2 versions of the study already, so they're kind of refining it. I guess that maybe version 3 will be asking the athletes as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember Zaitsev, I didn't have the opportunity to follow that show because it's in Italy, and I just see some snippet on YouTube. But Zaitsev was invited to a TV show, and he said, I did some investigation, and it looks like we were the one, like our organization of volleyball, our Volleyball Italian Federation, decided that was the level of risk for volleyball. So we deem volleyball as dangerous, but also there is no way to compare what the other people are doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's interesting. So just so I understand everything you're saying, and also to summarize for the fans.
Yeah.
So you've explained that the Polytechnic of Turin, they were commissioned to do a study by the Italian Olympic Committee to help determine how they can transition safely in terms of sports and which ones are going to be the most contagious. And some of the parameters they use is the number of contacts, the playing area, the number of participants, and then also staff involved, because it's people, right? How many people are involved on coaching staff, sidelines, referees, things like that. And then based on those parameters, they dictated that volleyball had the highest, I guess, amount in each of those categories, and therefore on the scale of 1 to 4, they determine which sports are the most contagious, and then volleyball and basketball were probably at the top, right?
Yeah, and the part that is you can say that every research can be controversial, because you can go in and say I don't agree with that, and it's totally fine. Mm-hmm. The other part is like in the methodology of delivering those survey to the federation. Everyone had no guidelines, but they could fill it out with any level of risk. So the combination of those 2 things, I think, didn't create the best output, the best outcome. I know they are refining it, and to be honest, I know that's a tricky topic because nobody has ever faced it. So of course you have to fail the first time you do something. I'll be surprised if anyone doesn't fail on the first try. But I don't want to be like the Debbie Downer of the research. Having a research is better than having no research. It's all about the improvement now, because I think that overall the key part is how can we identify those mitigation action so we can go back and go and play volleyball. Because let's not forget, it's not an exercise of deciding who's the most dangerous. I'm all about being positive, picking positive, and it's all about where can we go back and play volleyball? Because that's all we care about.
Yeah, exactly. So another element is that they surveyed people to have subjective evaluation, and those people were heads of the federations for each sport. So that's kind of an interesting spin. I'm not sure why they would even do that, because if they don't understand, who's to say they even understand the disease and even have an objective evaluation of how that disease is spread. So that's a really interesting piece. Yeah, I think this was prematurely published. I think they should have gone through all the phases and kept it really, really, closed in terms of how much they disclosed before they had a full report. Because this is how hysteria is created, is snippets. You take snippets. And I doubt they were trying to target any specific sport. I think they were just honestly trying to get data, but that should have been the first phase in a collection of an entire process. And I think they should have consulted exercise scientists that do have medical background, but also application in sports, to consult them on how does this study look? Does this make sense? Versus just purely maybe biologists of a university, and also to consult them on what's the best way to transition back into sports. Just yesterday, I saw a report on the news The Cleveland Cavaliers, which is LeBron James's old team, they just started allowing practices, but only 4 players at a time, and they have to do different drills. They cannot participate in the same drills and touch the same basketball. So it would have been a lot better if they published this study with also recommendations of how they plan to transition it. Because I think people will immediately perceive of, oh, we can't play then, you know?
Yeah. Now, to be honest, that was the second part of the report. It's all about like those mitigation factor. So there is a section that speaks to that, and there are a number of action and activity that you can do, especially related to training. There is something about volleyball. There's an old section that I haven't translated yet in English, but it's all about, you know, the most risky exercises when you do scrimmage, of course, or when you do attacking drills, because there's more people involved, there is more contact, because you are hitting the ball, you're next to somebody else who's blocking, there might be 2 or 3 people blocking, so there is extreme contact, if you can call it extreme. So that there is a section about that explains, okay, the mitigation factor will be wearing a mask while you wait, make sure that you clean up the ball every time you do it, even when you play and you start like a game in the future, you should have social distancing on the bench. You shouldn't have like any audience maybe in the first couple of like rows. You should be able to stay distant and don't do high five. So there are a lot of like those mitigation points. It just hasn't been set up yet by the government, because that's, I guess, it's the core part of phase 2. Like, by reading the research and seeing what is going on, what will be the official guidelines that the government will share with the federations.
Okay, so they did publish that along with the
yes. The Olympic Committee required the report from the college. They used the study to be delivered to the Italian government, and the Italian government is using that to identify which sports should start and when. So the other part that people were worried about is that if you deem volleyball as the most, contagious or risky, then when are we gonna start? That's why I get a little bit emotional.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's, the governments have to understand the needs of the people and how to work around that. Like in California, I mean, they could easily make a case to say, hey, we're going to be sheltered in place. No business is open for 3 months, right? They can make a case for that based on whatever science and data they have. But I think they also know that socially and mentally and emotionally, that can create more problems down the road for people to be locked in for that long. And as you can see, people are starting to protest. So they have 2 choices. They can either have more protests and risk more crime and have a different problem, or they can try to compromise and find safe ways for us to transition. And yes, it is more risky, but there is a need outside of just staying alive.
And yeah, I would probably preface this whole episode and video by saying that definitely, I think both of us, we're not epidemiologists, we're not doctors, we are not politicians, and we're not involved with anything in the government at all. So we're just literally two friends discussing the topic of going back to play volleyball. But yes, to answer your question, I totally agree. It's risky. I can see that in Italy. People have been sheltering in place for a long time. They are definitely losing their mind. And now that the phase 2 just started, people are probably getting a little bit too close already because they can't help anymore. They need, you need physical touch. You need to talk to someone. So I know that's very dangerous. It takes psychologists maybe. It's something we've never seen before. So I don't think anyone has a solution, and everyone is trying to do the best thing for our health. It's just extremely difficult to put a solution together.
Yeah, that would be interesting if what type of technology comes out of this pandemic for sports, like breathable masks that somehow eliminate the contagious particles from entering, but then you can still exhale carbon dioxide, goggles so that you don't touch your eyes on accident when we play. So I'm really curious. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Italy is a leader in some of the sports innovation for how to come back, because you guys, Italy was hit the hardest, one of the hardest hit countries, but also an extreme passion for sports. And then also for them to even publish, to even commission a study like this shows that they do want to do things the right way and come back in the safest way possible.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see what's going to be the next iteration of the study, if they will ever publish. I literally asked for this document to the Polytechnic of Turin. They sent me like more like a snippet, as you suggested, and they said that the full version was actually only available to the federation or the Olympic Committee. So that's the official response. But of course, everything that you've seen on the news, at least in Italian, that I could see, has been leaked. So it just takes a Google research with the right file type, PDF, to find at least the version 1 and the version 2. That's the thing that is not in their control. But again, I'm just focused on hopefully whoever reads that one and understand, with the right help of epidemiologists, psychologists, like whoever is needed, gets the right decision to make sure that we go back soon, but we go back safe. That's really what it takes.
Yeah, that's the end goal.
I can't wait.
I hope. I wonder what. Do you know if they had a separate identification for beach volleyball?
Yes, they did, and it's funny enough. Beach had again, the risk factor were from 0 to 4. Beach volleyball got an average of 2, mostly because it was indoor. But it's funny because the 2, it's under the same category about the field. And yes, beach volleyball is outdoor and it's only 2 people, but the size of the court is even smaller. It's 8 by 8 meters. I'm not good with inches and feet, but so it's a little bit smaller than the indoor one. So yes, technically you have a little bit more of square footage between the 2, but it was interesting.
I wonder if they actually quantified it and they just divided the number of people by the playing area, and maybe that's how they weighted that risk factor.
See, that's also a question of what did the person that compiled that survey thought. That's one way to answer the question. But you send it to 10 people, you will get probably 10 different approaches on how you will select a risk factor for volleyball or any other sport. Yes, that's the thing that was out of control.
Because we can even dive even deeper in that and how frequently they cover that surface area, right? That makes a big difference, because you can be in one sport and just stay in one spot in the entire time, but have a smaller area, or you can have a large area like soccer and go back and forth, right? And typically just spray everywhere you go.
yes, that's also very true. Yeah,
but I think that's probably really hard to quantify, and you probably have to evaluate so many games just to have an average of how frequently they cover certain surface area on a playing surface.
Again, I was just very surprised that the amount of the let's say the taxonomy of physical contact and the length of an average physical contact, that is something that could be not easily but somehow quantified, was not clear there. There is some hint to that. There is another section that has, I believe, if I remember correctly, 8 levels of how many people are there and how often they get in touch. So there is a section about it, but it's very, very light. And it's disjointed from the other section that I just mentioned. So it's just, as you said, extremely sophisticated. And probably that was the best shot at giving a try.
Yeah.
Hopefully Zaitsev is not too mad about it.
Oh, man. Speaking of Zaitsev, actually just had another talk with a strength and conditioning coach who worked with USA Volleyball athletes, and we were talking about some arm swing mechanics and some of the most powerful hitters, and we definitely had Ivan Zaitsev as one of them. Just someone that just obliterates the ball, and yells like a barbarian afterward. I love his energy.
It's a Viking. Well, now there's a lot of very successful Viking in volleyball and beach volleyball. It's the Viking era between Zaitsev, the Norwegian couple in beach volleyball. It's interesting. Yeah, the level
Yeah.
of physicality. I mean, I'm still happy that despite that, and I would call us the short guys,
Uh-huh.
right? We can still play. That's the amazing part of volleyball, because eventually, yes, we might not be Division One or interstellar players, but it's still fun to play and sometimes take down the big guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank goodness they created the libero position.
And the setter.
And the setter, yeah.
Even though right now I wouldn't be like a good fit for a setter anymore. Like when I started, it was different, but now, yes,
The
it's an
Italian
interesting evolution.
setter. This Italian setter is huge.
Giannelli is my
He's great.
favorite setter. I think in the next 5 years it's going to be another dimension. Like, I mean, no offense to De Cecco, Bruninho, and all the greatest guy around there, but Giannelli is like, if I remember correctly, it's 21 or 22, not even.
He's young, yeah.
And has already win a lot of stuff, has a lot of international experience, and damn, that guy can jump serve, block better than any average hitter.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. And we see some setter switching from the setting position to being an opposite. That's something that's very, very unusual. I don't remember. It's Aziz. It's the guy from Holland.
Yeah.
From Netherlands.
Yeah, he hits really hard.
He was a setter. I think he started in Italy when he was super young. If I remember correctly, he was like a second setter when he was 17, 18. I'm not sure. I will need to double check. And then I heard the news that he converted into like I think it was hitter and then opposite or just opposite. And he's killing it. Like his efficiency is insane.
Yeah. Yeah, he did really well in the VNL last year. And he was maybe around, and he's not incredibly tall either, maybe 6'6". So, but really dynamic, very big arm. I think that helps a lot. I'm thinking of Andrea Gianni too. He's played every position on the court. I think you bring a different level of understanding of the game. You're less one-dimensional. And Micah Ma'a from the USA national team, he was an outside hitter. He did a little bit setting too, but then now he is on the national team, is transitioning into setting. So he brings a very athletic style to that because he's max jumping on every play, and he's just a lot more physical than most other setters.
Yeah, Micah Christensen is another very talented guy. I love him. And he was playing in Macerata this year, if I remember correctly.
With Matt Anderson.
Sorry, Bruninho. No, he was playing at in Modena.
Modena,
yes. Yes,
with Matt Anderson, Zaitsev.
Yeah, good company.
That's a super team.
And they got third or fourth.
That's crazy.
Yeah, like I guess the last 2 years for Italian volleyball was phenomenal. I'm so happy because last year Macerata won what they call the treble, like everything, right? The world champion, European championship, and the league in Italy. I think also won the cup, if I remember correctly. And the coach, it's Fefe De Giorgi. It's my all-time favorite. Is a setter that has been playing in the 80s and the 90s with all the Bernardi, the Toffoli generation. But the thing that has always been he's always been my go-to, because the guy is literally tall like me. It's like between 5'10" and 5'11", and he was playing first division. Sure, it was the 90s, but that guy was insane. And now as a coach, he won everything. And I'm like, I was so happy for him.
That's a victory for all the short guys.
Yes, great player. And if you guys have never seen, Google, I'm not sure there is Google footage because it might be old, but Ferdinando De Giorgi is the number one. Maybe you should put a link.
Yeah, I'll try to find something and I'll put it in below. I think if you have Juan Torrena on your team, you're guaranteed finals. Any team he plays on, and I've never, very rarely do see like one person almost single-handedly in volleyball anymore. Like back in the 80s and 90s, you can have one guy like Milkovic way back, right, when he was young, he would just physically dominate a game. Now you usually need a complete roster just because the talent is so good, and especially in Italy, where now all the best talents come into Italy and has moved away from Russia. But Juan Torreira, like they, so in the 2016 Olympic team, it was a pretty decent team, but I didn't think Italy was super stacked necessarily. Like Brazil, I would say talent wise individually,
Yeah.
but Ivan Zaitsev like single-handedly took over the game, and then Juan Torreira also would take over the game. And it's just amazing how consistent, like no matter what set you gave them, no matter what they did, every time they touched the ball, something great happened, and that's so rare to see.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to that level, sometimes it's most also a combination of how the two teams play with each other. Like sometimes the weakness and the strengths combine in a
Yeah,
way that's like unexpected.
yeah,
Like if you have very strong middle blocker, or I would call them middle hitter, can be a
hmm
problem for some teams that play different. So at that point, everyone is so powerful that it's even hard to predict.
yeah,
But yeah, I totally agree with that. It's very, very hard. I have to say, during my last trip to Italy last December, I was able to go and watch Perugia
mm,
because I wanted to see Wilfredo Leon.
yeah,
And I had the same impression of him like when I saw LeBron James playing the first time in a basketball field. And I'm not a
hmm
basketball expert, but you know that when it's someone that's like 1 inch above everyone else, like it's so fast, it jumps so high, it's so quick, it's so big, and you're wondering, looks like the other people are average, right? And you
hmm
know they're not.
yeah,
So Leon is exactly like LeBron James in volleyball. Like his elevation, the trajectories is insane.
yeah,
And live, you know how much like live volleyball is incredibly entertaining. I think it's
yeah.
like basketball. You just get another level. I was mind blown. I was like, this guy is it's an alien. It can be.
He hits really hard. He's very skinny, but when he hits, like people are just getting blown up. I mean, people cannot react to his hit. Like they might be there, but it's very hard to dig. It was great watching him play on Zenit Kazan with Matt
Mhm.
Anderson. That was a very dominant team too for the
Yes.
last couple of years. They won the European Championship, they won the club championship, they won the Russian league, and they were winning everything.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that team, disbanded because all the everyone's seems to be going to Italy now. I think on Perugia, they also the Checo's the setter.
He just left. He went to Macerata a couple of weeks ago because
Okay.
Bruninho went back to Brazil.
Oh,
That's going to be very interesting because Perugia fans are extremely emotional.
that because that group stayed together for a long time
Yes.
because Simone, Robert Landy Simone also is playing for them, right?
Simone is in Macerata as well.
Okay.
Yeah. They beat so Simone, Bruninho, Stankovic, um, what's the head? The other Leal, the other Cuban. They were
Uh-huh.
all in Macerata without one trainer as well. So they were in the super team that with Fefe De Giorgi won everything last year.
hmm
And yeah, but Simone was I remember he was back in Brazil. He's been like, I mean, he's been playing forever and
Yeah.
still unstoppable.
Yeah. One team that I like to watch, I forget the name, but they have thinking about the short team that I just love. It's so exciting. They have Ishikawa from Japan, they have Hernandez from Cuba, left-handed, and their setter was Maruf from Iran. So actually, I was maybe one of the shorter teams. I mean, I don't think they broke top four in the Italian league, but just to know that there's a group of guys that are not that tall that are still playing really well at that level. I think their color is blue and blue.
It was a Verona maybe. I think Verona is the blue one. Or it might be when Roma was there. I don't remember. I can't. I remember a team. I don't remember which team it was. Because
Okay.
then they keep changing names so often with the sponsorship that it's crazy.
Oh, that's how they decide the team names is for the sponsorships.
It's like the franchise works in Italy, all the sport, like differently from the United States. So
hmm
we don't have teams that change city and the franchise move to another location. You can't do that. but you can change sponsor. So the city stays the same, and usually the ownership stays the same, but the main sponsor changes quite a lot.
Okay.
So yeah,
So,
for example, Macerata is famous to be called Lube, because Lube
yeah.
is the name of the main sponsor, Lube Cucine. They make like a kitchen, and they've been the historical sponsor, or the historical Sisley Treviso. Sisley is an Italian brand, is a fashion brand that doesn't even exist anymore. But in the 90s and 2000, it was the Sisley Treviso, and everyone was calling like Sisley. So it's yeah, I think it's called an eponymous in English when your brand becomes a part of like the everything else. But yeah, it's that's the way it works.
That, you know, one year I was trying to look up Treviso for the modern teams, because I think that was a team that Lionel Marshall, Zlatanov,
Yeah.
that I think is as a team in red. I was trying to look up, I used to watch them a long time ago when those guys were on that team, and then I couldn't find them, but maybe because I was looking, the sponsor didn't exist anymore.
No, it doesn't. Yes, that might be the reason. You know, there is a funny thing about that team, the historical team that Zorzi, that was winning everything in the 90s. They were all black with like those red lines, and they did something new. Like in the 90s, they were the first one to put the face of the player at the bottom of this jersey on the back instead of the names. That was pretty unique. They just did it like for 1 year.
Yeah.
But I remember that team was so strong that they said, they are so nasty, they are so bad, they didn't even know each other names. So they just have the face so they can recognize themselves.
That's funny. That's pretty badass.
Oh, I heard the first time I was crying. That was phenomenal. That gives you the idea of the toughness of a team. That was awesome.
Yeah, that's funny.
Oh, God.
Well, Federico, thanks again for sharing all this information. And if you want to add to this conversation, please do so in the comments section below. And especially if you're an epidemiologist, maybe you can bring further clarification on why they would conduct a study like this and decide certain parameters. As Federico said, we're just two volleyball junkies, just want to play volleyball. And we saw the study, we're like, we got to talk about this. This can't be true. But it makes sense. We've tried to discuss both sides, what we thought they did well in the study and what they thought they could have improved. But at the end of the day, I think their intent is obvious. I think they're trying to do this for the right reasons, to make sure that we can transition back to playing volleyball, to living a life and being healthy, but also doing it in a safe way. So, and I'm sure we'll do future videos, because we went on a nice little Italian volleyball tangent. But if you guys want us to talk about any other topics, like maybe how Italian volleyball works, I think that would be a fun question to talk about as well. Because in America, we don't have the highly developed club system that Europe has. So it'd be cool to talk about that sometime.
Anytime. Thanks for having me. And that was a nice conversation. Nice catching up after a while.
Yeah, that was fun.
Next time on a volleyball court, hopefully.
Yes. Yeah. We'll have our Bluetooth, and we'll have a conversation as we're playing.
Let's do this.
All right. Take care, Federico.
Bye.
Bye.